The pasuk says, "Vayavo b'nei Yisrael Kol HaAidah." The Bnei Yisrael had come, the complete congregation. So Rashi explains what's the connotation of Kol HaAidah. So Rashi says that all those who were meant to die over the 40-year period passed away. This is the new generation that will go into Canaan. So the question is, why is it important for us to know at this point that the old generation passed on and this is the new generation? So the Or Chaim Kodesh explains, their classification is Bnei Yisrael. That every one of them, every individual, his classification is Bnei Yisrael, Begeder Yishorim v'Tzadikim, which is the classification that Yishorim and Tzadikim. There's no claim against them. They're exactly where they should be, spiritually speaking. This Eidah, this congregation, is the wholesome congregation. We shouldn't put them la Torah. Why is it important for us to know this point? Exactly what their spiritual status is? L'gimel sibos, for three reasons. We speak about the story. They start quarreling with Moshe. So who's quarreling with Moshe? These most special people. They themselves seemingly speak out of turn. It's interesting. Rashi explains later what was the claim against Moshe, because he was told to speak to the rock and he struck the rock, and that's Chazal. The Or Chaim Kodesh has many other interpretations. I think in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah, that he referred to them as you rebellious people, because they are that special spiritual level. They have the special distinction. I mean, how do you speak to such an auspicious group with such a term which is inappropriate? So because he spoke to them inappropriately, that's the reason why it was deemed that he should not go into Eretz Yisrael. That's one interpretation of Or Chaim HaKodesh. He cites it in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah. So it's telling us who is this group, that they're Kol HaAidah, they're the perfect group, and therefore later when he becomes angry and he strikes the rock, it's not for striking the rock, it's what preceded the striking the rock. The way he referred to this group. And this is the reason why he was punished, because he referred to them as rebellious. I'll give you an example. You have a person who's, I always use Rav Moshe Feinstein, and you come in and you feel he should have acknowledged you, he doesn't. And you speak out of turn and you refer to him in a way which is inappropriate. Inappropriate. Even if maybe he did make a mistake, you don't speak to that kind of person in this manner, under any circumstance. Even if it may have been an oversight, it does make a difference. Speaking to the person in that manner, it's a level of disrespect which is unforgivable. Klal Yisrael now at that special level, even Moshe Rabbeinu had no right to refer to him as Morim. Beis lahagdil mailas Miriam oleh shalom. To understand, if these people are so special, why, when Miriam passed away, did the wellspring cease? To tell us that as special as they were, their level was not sufficient, they should merit the wellspring. To magnify Miriam's special level, it's only because of her we had the water. Nobody was at a level that in their schus and their merit it would be the wellspring. It wasn't sufficient that the wellspring should continue. Miriam, because the wellspring was b'schus Miriam. That's the second reason why it's identified. Despite the fact how special they were, when Miriam passes away, everything stops. Gimel, Alpi Divrei Zal, Shomri Yisrael Loholchu, Ligmul Chesed Miriam. They did not do Gemilas Chesed when she passed away. As I said, they didn't even eulogize her. She was buried, and it was over. They did not do Gemilas Chesed with Miriam. Sheniklo Moshe v'Aaron Choshev Aaron Shebo Ligmul Chesed Miriam. When originally the whole group came to Aaron and Moshe, they thought they'd come to pay a Shiva visit. Their sister passed away. It turned out why? So if that's the case, if you were so special, and Aaron thought they were coming to pay a Shiva visit to Nichma Velim, why all of a sudden did he speak out of turn? So you think why? Maybe they're not at that level that they should be. Now, that when they came, they were even then they were still tzaddikim, and they weren't tzaddikim. V'tam shelo gomlu chesed amar akosuf b'samuch v'tam b'sham Miriam v'tikov v'sham v'amru b'gemara, quotes the Gemara, zel l'shonim v'tamos samuch l'misa kfura. There's halacha that the moment you're not supposed to delay the burial after the passing. The person should be buried immediately. So the burial, they were busy, they were occupied burying her. So at that moment, it wasn't yet time to do Gemilas Chasodim. And all of a sudden, they were overwhelmed when they realized they no longer have the wellspring. That caused that distraction. So the reason why weren't didn't they pay the Shiva visit? They were so Thursday, they were special because they were preoccupied in burying her. And the moment they finished, all of a sudden they realized there's a very serious distraction. There's no water, and without water in the desert, you can't survive. Immediately, we juxtapose the fact Miriam passes away, she's buried, all of a sudden there's no water. As a result of that, that's the reason why they didn't work Menachem Avil. They didn't pay the Shiva visit to Moshe and Aaron because of the tzad. But who are they? They're that special group. You know, when I was sitting Shiva just now, a relative came to be Menachem Avil, and he told me a story which somebody had said when he was sitting Shiva, this person, and there was this one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, and people streamed to them for all kinds of brachos, and there are all kinds of people waiting. The wealthy people, poor people, and this Rebbe had an impeccable reputation. He doesn't acknowledge anybody for anybody. He treats everybody equally. And he notices the poor man, and he knows exactly where the poor man is coming. He has to support his family, he has to marry off his children, and he sees a wealthy man waiting also. He knows who he is. And he tells the Gabbai, the one who sets the order, who comes in first and second, he should let the rich man come in first, the wealthy man come in first. And the poor man is there before, and all of a sudden he sees the wealthy man has priority to come in first. And immediately, of course, he's offended. I mean, here he's waiting. Why is he giving priority to this rich man? Must be because he's wealthy. So he's like taken aback. I mean, here the Rebbe has this special reputation that he doesn't give anybody priority other than who he is. And all of a sudden, this man is wealthy. He's giving him priority to come in first. So he comes in, the wealthy man, and he makes a request. And he says to him, you have to give me a certain amount of money, a large amount. He told him exactly how much money. So the person had no problem because this Rebbe, when he gave a bracha, the bracha actually took effect, takes an envelope, it's filled with cash, gives him the cash in the envelope. And the Rebbe has the envelope on the table. Okay, goes out, and then the poor man comes in. And as he comes in, he makes a comment to the Rebbe. He says, I didn't know that the Rebbe gives priority to wealthy people over poor people. The Rebbe does not respond. Takes the envelope with the cash in it, gives it to the poor man, gives him the blessing, be well. He goes out, and the poor man has needs a ride to go wherever he came from, and he meets this rich man, and this rich man has no idea what the Rebbe did with the envelope with the money, and the poor man says to the wealthy man, he says, "By the way, you're going in this direction?" Sure. He says, "I'll give you a lift." All of a sudden, he gets into the car or whatever the means of transportation was, and he takes out the envelope and he starts counting the cash in the car with the rich man sitting there. And the rich man notices that this is the envelope he gave the Rebbe. And he's counting and he's very excited, the poor man. And the rich man says, "By the way," I said, he says, "I just gave that envelope to the Rebbe for a blessing." And all of a sudden, the poor man realizes the reason why he asked the rich man to come in first. So if he comes first, he gets the envelope of cash that he give the poor man. If the poor man would come first, he wouldn't have the money to give to the poor man. So it's not because, but everybody has their own reading on that reality. He immediately suspected the Rebbe is giving priority because the man's rich. He's a rich man, but rather he had him come in first because he wanted to have the means to provide for the poor man. So he went back into the Rebbe. The poor man, he apologizes. And he says, I suspect, he says, now I understand how special Rebbe is. He says, it's not so special. When you realize the reality and you see it, it's when you don't realize, now that you see it in retrospect is nothing to be impressed with. You shouldn't have suspected me initially, because the only reason why I wanted the rich man to come first, to be able to provide for you the means to have what you need. So there's no trick. The Gemara, we just had the Gemara about Basra regarding Tzedakah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the prince of Klal Yisrael, his sister's children were, all of a sudden, the Roman tax clerk comes between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur and collects 7 gold coins from them. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai already had a dream that this was going to happen. Why? Because if you don't give your money to Tzedakah, where you're supposed to give it, ultimately the government's coming to take the money. If you don't meet what's expected of you. So the tax collector takes the 7 gold coins and they come and they bemoan their fate to their uncle, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. What happened? So he said to them, I knew it was going to happen. I had a dream and that was going to happen. Because you were supposed to give that money to charity and you didn't give it to tzedakah. So he says to the nephew, say to him, but if you would have told us in advance it was going to happen, we would have given it to tzedakah. He said, that's no trick. If the government's going to take it, and either way you're not going to have, therefore you're giving it to tzedakah, it doesn't have that special value. It's when you think you use it for yourself and you give it away, then it's something special. So in retrospect, understanding what I should have done and I didn't do, and now if I would have known, I would have, it doesn't have the value. So if you would have understood initially that I don't give priority and there was a reason and you would have suspected me, that would have been special. But now that you realize what happened, in retrospect, I only had the man come in to provide for you. Now it's nothing special. Now that you understand what I did. So the same thing. Kol Yisrael. Who are they? The Bnei Yisrael. That's the classification. Wanted they eulogize Miriam? They should have. Evidently, they're not what we think they are. Hashem says they are that. The Bnei Yisrael. Why didn't they? Because Miriam passed away immediately. They had to bury her. And then, but why didn't they eulogize her? The answer is because immediately the wellspring ceased and they were preoccupied with that issue, because without water you can't survive the desert. That's the reason why. So the Torah is giving you an understanding why Klal Yisrael did not eulogizing Miriam. There should not be a claim against them because they are Bnei Yisrael. If you're Bnei Yisrael, there's no basis even to suspect why they didn't do it. The Chavetz Chaim cites, name it a Rambam, people think, you see a person doing something and you have a judgment call. He could have done something inappropriate or no. So the halacha is there's a mitzvah saseh, b'tzedek tishra misecho. You have to give your fellow the benefit of the doubt. That's a mitzvah saseh, Torah obligation. So if it's a 50-50 call and you don't, and you see it negative and you speak negatively about that person, it's bona fide lashon hara. But let's say the person was a Russia. You don't have to give benefit of doubt. So when you speak negatively about him, since you have no obligation to judge him favorably, when you speak negatively about him, because the classification is Russia, you can speak about him. But a middle of the road person, because you have an obligation to give him the benefit of doubt if you don't, although you believe he did the wrong thing, it's unjustified because you should have given him a benefit of the doubt. What about a person's at tzaddik? And it sways more to the negative that he did something wrong. If he's a tzaddik, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt, even though it's more to the negative. Because since his classification is tzaddik, this person doesn't do that kind of thing. Well, you think he did. Doesn't make a difference what you think. You have an obligation to judge him according to who he is. And since he's a tzaddik, you have to see him in a positive light. So if you speak negative about him, that's considered bona fide lashon hara. So everything's based on who the person is. The Torah is saying these are Bnei Yisrael. But why don't they eulogize them? Evidently, they're not Bnei Yisrael. They're not of that special spiritual distinction. If God, Hashem says the Bnei Yisrael, so now we have to try to understand why. And that's the Torah says, because Thomas Shah Miriam, because Miriam passed away suddenly, they had a burial. And immediately after the burial, since the wellspring was in a merit and there was a question of survival, they were distracted with that. And that's the reason why they went to Moshe. And that was the cause why they did not eulogize her.
Rabbi, I have a couple questions.
Rashi cites the Chazal, the Midrash, it's Gemara. Lama Nisklam Nisus Miriam, Paradum Nisus Miriam, to teach us that just as the Paraduma is Mechaper, atones, Misit Tzadikim is Mechaper. The passing of Tzadikim also atones for the generation. So firstly, I want to make it clear. Each man is for himself. Every person has a record. The record has to be audited. And if the person's accountable, he's accountable. I mean, how is the passing of the tzaddik, how's that a kapora for the generation? Kapora, atonement is on a personal level. So what is the meaning? The tzaddik atones for the generation. So the way he explained it yesterday, we didn't specifically speak about this point. There's a judgment against Klal Yisrael, because we speak about communal responsibility. So communal responsibility means, and the majority of their actions weighs to the negative, it's a basis for midas adin, for prosecution. But when Hashem takes the tzaddik, that quells the prosecution and it resets the balance. As I explained yesterday, the name of the Chazon Ish. So with Bachap, it doesn't mean on the individual level, each person has to atone for his own record. You have to do tshuva. And if a person does not do tshuva, he's accountable. But in terms of on a national level, when we speak of arevus, communal responsibility, that's where the tzaddik comes into play. That his passing brings kapora that now the balance is reset. That's number one. Secondly, sometimes a person is only worthy of siyata d'shmaya if he has a personal worthiness. He doesn't have personal worthiness, he doesn't. I'll give you an example. There was a person who was the equivalent of Hitler, Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, in the 1600s. His name was Chmelnytsky. He was a Tatar. He annihilated the majority of the Jewish communities in Eastern Europe. Chmelnytsky was Talmid Shach. It was known as Tach V'Tat. And people fast during those times. That's the reason why we say Avarachmim in Sfira, because many of the Crusades and these things happened then. After the majority of Europe was destroyed, what was the next generation? The next generation, Torah-wise, blossomed at a level which never happened in hundreds of years. The Vilna Gaon was born. It was the Taz, and many of the great poskim and Torah leaders came into being after this. After the slate was destroyed, Hashem all of a sudden, there was a siyata d'shmaya for Klal Yisrael that the greatest Torah sages who hadn't existed in hundreds of years all of a sudden started to sprout. Why? So it was explained that's the reaction to midas adin. After midas adin takes its pound of flesh, Hashem says, now you're ready for real time. I give you that special siyata d'shmaya that you can maximize and advance at a level which under normal circumstances you can't advance. So the midas tzadikim, although it not only does it avert the midas adin, sometimes midas tzadikim gives the generation the merit that even though on the personal level they're not worthy of the siyata d'shmaya, but the passing of the tzaddik, because he's so vital to Klal Yisrael, there's a vacuum. There's a void. So that void has to be replaced. And as a result of that, Hashem gives a siyata d'shmaya to those on that person who are not worthy, but they're worthy now because they're passing up the tzaddik. That's an understanding. That's another benefit or derivative, positive derivative of the tzaddik passing away, that he's mechaper. Basis for spiritual contamination is death. Why is there death? Because Adam had eaten of the Eitz Hadas. Okay? The Ramchal writes, the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that before Tchias HaMesim, everybody has to turn to dust and then they're resurrected. Even Moshe Rabbeinu. Although the Torah tells us at the end of Zos HaBrocha, that Moshe Rabbeinu, even in the grave, has his vitality, and it looks like a person who's sleeping. But even at Moshe Rabbeinu, right before resurrection, Moshe Rabbeinu turns to dust, and immediately he reverts back to Moshe Rabbeinu, plus all his level of accomplishments. Everything has to go back to dust, and then it's resurrected. So Ramchal says, why? I mean, if a person is as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, why can't he live eternally? What does he have to? Why does Moshe have to die? Moshe died like everybody else. Said Gemara says in Shabbos, "Ein misam lo chet." The reason why a person dies is because there's chet, and the Gemara explains it doesn't mean to say because the person himself sinned, because there were certain people, 5 people never sinned in their lives and they died. Binyamin, the son of Yaakov, never sinned, but yet he died. Why did he die? Because of sin. What's this? The sin of Adam. So he explains, the Ramchal, that anything which represents Ra, evil, cannot be part of eternity. Because eternity means you're attaching yourself in a perfect state to Hashem. It says, Lo yigurcha Ra bo'olecha. Hashem has no relevance to Ra. So every human being, because of the sin of Adam, is tainted with Ra as a result of the chet of Adam Rishon. Therefore, when a person is resurrected, the evil that exists within him remains in the ground, and what's resurrected is only the pure matter. So the neshama, it's going to be reinfused in the body is of pure matter, because the Ra has to be expunged from the body, and how is it expunged? Through decomposition in the ground. So what is resurrected is only the matter, which is not has no relevance to that Ra. I'm explaining the Ramchal. That's the reason why everybody at the time of Tchias HaMesim has to first turn to dust and then is resurrected. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, even those who never sinned, because they die. They only die because they don't have that. They're not totally pure. Because everybody has to be part of eternity if you're worthy, but you can't be part of eternity if you possess that impurity in your physicality. Okay, that's the understanding. So I mentioned this maybe a week ago. We say in the second bracha of Shemon Esrei, Hashem is meimis umechaya umatzvich Yeshua. Right? That's what we say in Chalka Chaim B'Chesed. Meimis umechaya. God causes one to die and mechaya and resurrects. Umatzvich Yeshua. And he causes the salvation to sprout. Right? He's meimis. What we're saying, Hashem is meimis umechaya. He causes one to die for the sake of resurrection. You're only dying because a person can't be part of eternity unless he dies. So death is actually a gift. Because if you want to be part of eternity, you first have to die to decompose, so that when you're going to be resurrected, you should be pure enough to have the relation with Hashem. Because anything that's associated with evil cannot be part of eternity. That's the understanding. Now, if not for the Chet of Adam Rishon, Adam would have been part of eternity. But now, because now he possesses that evil, because the Eitz Hadas is Tov v'Ra, all humanity now is to die, to be part of eternity. Some person dies, he'll go into oblivion. But even if a person is worthy to be part of eternity, his life is finite. Because this entity of human being possesses that evil cannot be part of eternity. That's the understanding. So Klal Yisrael at Sinai, when we said Nasav Nishma, at that moment we were able to separate that evil from our being, and therefore we could have been part of eternity. And based on the pasuk, the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, we would have lived forever. But as a result of the chet of what? Of the egel, which is similar, like we discussed, it was external, although it wasn't within them. So they were not inclined, they were drawn to it. So that reactivated the impurity of the chet of the Eitz Hadas. Therefore, as a result of that, going forward, every one of us was subject to death. What's death? Death generates impurity. Death is chet. Chet is nether force. That generates nether forces. And when you have an enormous concentration of nether forces, that creates an impurity that the only thing that could remove that impurity is the paraduma. Going to a mikveh will not do it. Or immersing yourself in the river or in the ocean is not going to do it. You need this new process called paraduma. And that's Zos HaTorah. And as a result, because we reached that special level of spiritual distinction, our neshamas there was a metamorphosis. We became a different entity of being, that the soul of the Jew is not the soul of a non-Jew. So we said, therefore, the body of the Jew has such a magnetism towards the nether forces are attracted to it, because the dimension of holiness in that receptacle, that causes this overwhelming level of impurity, and therefore one doesn't even have to come in contact with the body. Even just being under the same roof, that's enough to be affected by that level of contamination. Based on the Psukim, based on the Midrash, that since the beginning of existence, Hashem descended from the celestial to the terrestrial level. He brought heaven to earth. That's what happened at Sinai. And that's why the world quaked, because the world didn't have the capacity to be able to accommodate God's presence. The world was quaking. And the mountain was on fire. Everything was billowing, being exposed. It was a vaporization. The evil that was within us was vaporized, because it cannot coexist with Hashem's presence. That's how it was expunged from us at that point. But it was outside of us. As a result of Chet Egel, we drew it back within us by crossing that line. I'll give you an example. A person is detoxed and rehabilitated, physically speaking. And then the person makes a mistake, takes the drug over again. So when you take the drug over, you're bringing that foreign substance into your system. So again, the person becomes an addict again. He's again craving for what he originally craved. If he would have remained in the detox level, it wouldn't have affected him. He was no longer craving because the system was cleansed. But if you go and partake of it again, you start craving because you have that foreign substance. When we did Avodah Zorah, the Egel, we reintroduced that representation of whatever the Rav Eitz Hadas was. And therefore, we were subject to death.
Rabbi, after the second commandment, when they couldn't take hearing Hashem's proclamations anymore, didn't they essentially die and resurrect at that time?
Yes, it does. The Gemara says in
So
Shabbos.
maybe that's the equivalent of what.
Correct. Good. It's good. Yeah, but they were still physicality. They had the same bodies. They had the same
resurrected there too, right?
It was equivalent of resurrection, because they couldn't tolerate the Shechina, the overwhelming presence of Hashem was beyond anybody's capacity. They could not tolerate that dimension of Kedusha. As a result of that, they passed away.
No, but even
Hashem had to resurrect them, meaning bring them back to life.
But also physically, they were resurrected, right? Moshe no longer stuttered, and everyone who was a cripple now could walk. I mean, all these things. If you were blind, you could see. All that happened.
And what happened after the Chet Egel? Everybody reverted back to the original handicap.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Except Moshe.
Who did not go back was Moshe Rabbeinu.
Right.
But everybody else went back to a person who was blind, whatever he was, that originally handicapped, represented itself.
So I understand the two concepts. The death of a tzaddik, either it provides a springboard for a subsequent or the succeeding generation,
which is spiritual opportunity,
or on a collective basis prevents a wipeout of the entire Jewish people or some other. Okay.
Correct.
And the paraduma sort of reinstates, if you will, somebody who had been exposed to such horrible nether forces by being in the same, either touching and or being in the same
You relieve
room.
nether force. It's like take the leech off your body without tearing your flesh.
Okay, and so the linkage between one and the other, between the evisceration, if you will, of the nether force exposure from death and the tzaddiks passing, that's maybe I'm dense. I don't know. Maybe if everybody else gets it, I can have a private.
Kapara means that you relieved of that representation of that. When a person sins, you create a force, and because of that force, you deserve to be punished. Right? We spoke about that. Because the whole concept of Midas Arachim, we spoke about the 13 attributes of mercy, is Nosi Ovam Feshem Chato. God sustains the deliberate, the defiant, and the inadvertent sin. Because normally, otherwise, if you created it, it would attach itself to your soul and it would sap you. And the question is, could you survive it? Hashem says, I will maintain that to give you every chance to be able to maximize on your life. That's the concept of kapara. Sometimes kapara makes it, you vaporize it totally. It's machaper. And that, if a person does a proper tshuva, it's as if the sin never existed. That force is vaporized. And not only that, it's turned into a mitzvah because that was the basis for you to do tshuva. You did tshuva because of that. You came to that recognition. But here we're speaking about kapara. When we speak kapara on a natural level, it means there's not going to be a claim against you. When the tzaddik is taken, each person I said still has to deal with his own record. He has to do his personal tshuva. But in terms of a claim, which normally there would have been a claim because there's a basis for prosecution, that quells, that silences the prosecution because of the death of the tzaddik. So just as the tzaddik allows us to continue and function within a spiritual state and have opportunity, the tzaddik's passing provides that same accommodation that Hashem will allow us to continue with that accommodation as if the sin doesn't exist.
Okay. And then the paraduma, what it allows us.
That allows that. That takes off the contamination. The contamination does not allow, like I mentioned yesterday, the Vilna Gaon, the only time he ever contaminated himself is when his father and mother died. Because there's a mitzvah to contaminate yourself. Otherwise, the Vilna Gaon, because the Vilna Gaon was such a level, that became an infringement that entombed him to a point, it interfered with his ability to achieve certain spiritual advances within his own life. Because those nether forces don't allow you to come upon certain truths. I once mentioned the name of Or HaChaim. Whenever we study Torah, person is a genius, has the genius mind, and yet it comes to Torah, he can't come upon its truth. Because other areas of knowledge, it's not relevant to spirituality. You have the intellect capacity, you're able to come upon it. Torah, which is dependent on, you have to be merit, the siyata d'shmaya. So if you have the nether forces, which does not allow that becomes an impediment, you don't come upon its truth. And therefore he says, if you do tshuva and you become worthy, then you could merit because the nether force now is relieved from you, is released, removed from you. Now you have those vistas of truth available, and you come upon the truth of Torah.
So I have one follow-up. So if I get this right, then the paraduma relieves the contamination. It enables you to achieve spiritual growth in a similar manner. The death of a tzaddik sort of compensates for the generation. Compensates, it's probably not the right word, for the generation, so that either that generation and or succeeding generation can achieve its spiritual potential or growth.
It's multiple. First, survival, not to be annihilated or not to be hurt very badly. In addition, the spiritual as component.
Okay. So then my final question, I think, is it's either inadvertent or intentional to be exposed to a human being who has died, right? You either have an obligation to bury them and or you unintentionally were in the same room or whatever it may be, as compared to the tzaddik and and that generation where these people have gone the wrong way, or are not sin free. One is a kapara for a generation that has clearly done something wrong, which is the paraduma. You may have done
It may
nothing
not be
wrong.
back general. We speak about things they accumulate over generations. I mean, when it's when the balance becomes so heavily weighted to the negative, that's when Hashem can't silence Satan any longer, and that's the midas adin. It's not necessarily one generation; it's an accumulation. It's a claim against Klal Yisrael. This all goes into communal responsibility. The debt becomes so overwhelming. We have to address the debt. We have to pay it off to some degree. The Jews will never be annihilated totally, because God promised the Jews are an eternal people. But how heavy are the cash flows going to be? To what degree do we have to suffer? That's the midas adin. So the tzaddik averts that to give us a chance to do tshuva, and even if we don't, to do other mitzvahs, because otherwise, if we're annihilated, it's over. You're not able to take advantages of spiritual opportunities, even if you don't do tshuva.
Rabbi, to just highlight what the last thing Mark said.
Yeah. That's Mark. Make your remark again. Your comment.
It would seem in a simplistic balancing act that the death of a tzaddik would be result in a greater collective advancement than the tzaddik on his own would have achieved on behalf of Klal Yisrael.
Okay. Now, there's a question which is asked. Avram Avinu, when he hosted the angels, how old was he? He was 99 years old. And he sees three men, and it's the hottest day of the history of existence. He runs towards them, and he literally begs them. He prostrates himself, and he asks them to accept his hospitality. And he offers the shade of his tree. He offers them water to wash their feet, offers them bread. So what does Chazal say? In the merit of the tree, the shade of the tree, we merited the Anei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, which protected us for 40 years in the desert. In the merit of the water, we merited the Be'er of Miriam, the wellspring of Miriam. In the merit of the bread, we merited the man. So the question is, and everybody, it's an obvious question, Avraham Avinu's whole life was chesed. What was so special about this chesed? He offered a tree, he had this. I mean, the Gemara says in Bava Metzia that the hospitality Avram offered his guests were Shlomo Melech. In the height of his power, it was no less than that. That's the way he accommodated his guests. So if that's the case, why we make such a special issue with this accommodation now, the shade of the tree, and we put it under the microscope? What he did himself, Hashem did directly. What he did through an intermediary, it came through an intermediary. What's special? So Chofetz Chaim says something phenomenal. So Chofetz Chaim explains that you have two people. You have an ordinary tzaddik, and you host them. Because you're accommodating the needs of the tzaddik, the chesed is special. You're not accommodating the needs of an ordinary person. It's not an ordinary person. So because the beneficiary it has greater status, the act, although it's the same act providing the food, that whatever it may be, but because of the recipient, the beneficiary, the act takes on another level of dimension. For instance, the Gemara says in Brachos that if you give wine to a tzaddik, it's like pouring the libations on the mizbeach. Because since the tzaddik is an entity of holiness, it's not just you're giving somebody to drink wine. It's like bringing libations. And when you give him food, it's like bringing a korban on the mizbeach. He's a mizbeach. And when you give him fruit, it's like bringing the bikurim. That's who he is. But let's say you have two levels of tzaddikim. You have an ordinary tzaddik, you have someone, he's the ultimate tzaddik of the generation. You're doing the same act of hospitality, but because the beneficiary, the greater tzaddik, has a special status, your act of chesed to him has another dimension of chesed. Now, who did Avram host? He hosted the angels. He wasn't aware they were angels. But the reality was the beneficiaries of his hospitality was the ultimate level. Angels. Why did Avram merit that his guests should be angels? Since we say mitzvah geres mitzvah, the accumulation of all the chesed he did in his life, all the hospitality allowed him to merit the ultimate level of hospitality, that the beneficiary should be the ultimate beneficiary, the angels. Therefore, the result of his act of chesed was the Amei HaKavod, the Mon, and the bear. That's how the Chofetz Chaim answers that. So that act that he did at that point, at the age of 99, had greater value because Hashem brought him the opportunity to be able to host such special guests. The tzaddik that he's chosen to be the one to be taken out of his existence, to bring kapara for Klal Yisrael. Why was he taken? Because he's so special. Because that's Megal B'Zchus Al Yedei Zakai. Because he is so special, and he lives for the sake of Hashem, and his life only has that value. Although he's being taken, it's okay, because I only live for Hashem. So now, because he lives for Hashem, when Hashem gives him the ultimate opportunity, which has greater value than maybe his whole life, because Klal Yisrael now it only is going to continue only because he's being taken. So therefore, that moment has greater value than he would have been just as an individual, succeeding on a personal level. That if a mitzvah comes to you, and you want to actualize the mitzvah, and for some reason you're not able to, you're accredited for the mitzvahs if you fulfilled the mitzvah. Right? The person wants to do a mitzvah, but mitzvah the other in their nas. He's not able to do the mitzvah. You credit through the mitzvah. So you have a tzaddik and you have a poor man. I want to accommodate the tzaddik. There's a mitzvah, to revere him, to honor him. But Hashem says, no, you take care of the poor man. So I'm an onus. I want to accommodate the tzaddik. Hashem's not allowing me. You're credited as if you attended the needs of the tzaddik. It's like wanting to do something that doesn't work out, but if you could have, you would have. If that's the case, but only God knows that, you're credited as if you hosted the tzaddik. So it's a win-win on all sides over here.
Don't we also the
That's very
concept?
interesting. If you see something clearly, at the end of the day, we don't realize if you walk you walk that straight line, what kind of great day we have. We succeed at so many levels, and if we'd only appreciate our level of success, you'd never have a bad day. But since we always see it within a certain context, and you say, no, it was a terrible day at the office, there were no patients, didn't show up, and I had one safe in the office, I was learning the whole day, but it's not, that doesn't pay the bills. But if you don't really understand, you don't even know what that generates. Not to ask, not to be tested in a way that it's okay. Hashem provides my living. And now that I have time to learn, I learn. And if you meet the grade over there, the achievement on every level is greater than if you would have patience all day. And you have to open a new bank account because the federal FDIC won't cover it because you have too much money in one of the accounts. You have to open another account. He says, I rejoice over your words, meaning your mitzvahs, as if I came upon great spoils. So the Vilna Gaon says, in Hebrew, there are no two words which are synonyms. Every word, although it's similar to another word, it has a very specific meaning in that particular context. So he says there are 7 or 8 expressions for joy. There's sosa, v'simcha, Gila, Rina, Ditza, V'chedva. There are many expressions of joy. But each word which refers to joy, it has, in its specific application, it means something very specific. It's joy, but it's a different application, a different experience of joy. That's the Vilna Gaon. He says, I'll give you an example. David Mel says, Sosa nochem resech k'motzi shalom rov. I rejoice over your imrosecha, your dictates, as if I came upon great spoils. He says, what's soso? So. It's a level of joy, of like ecstasy. He says, what is it analogous to? A king had a dedicated subject, and he says to him, because of your service all your life to me, I'm going to give you an opportunity to go into my treasury storage location, and over there you're going to see things that are only befitting for a king. A commoner has never set his eyes on these things, on these type of items. The value is unlimited. The beauty, the workmanship is one of a kind. And because you're my dedicated servant, I will let you go in there for half an hour, and you can take anything you want, and whatever you accumulate in half an hour, it's yours. But after half an hour, you're out, and you can't take anything more. But he says, I want to tell you in advance, when you see it, you may become so overwhelmed with its beauty, and you're not going to take advantage of the moment, and you're not going to start accumulating what's there. So I advise you, the moment you see it, just take it and take as much as you can without ceasing to take. Because at any level of evitation, the moment of evitation, the loss is an untold loss. Okay? He goes in, he's allowed in there, and he sees the opportunity. And all of a sudden, he's like overwhelmed. And he's like, he's mesmerized, and he realizes if he goes into this mindset, he's not going to take advantage of accumulating it. And every moment has infinite worth. So he starts accumulating, and the clock is ticking, and finally the buzzer rings after the half an hour. And he sees what he gathered, phenomenal. But he saw how much more treasure there is. So he's rejoicing in terms of what he accomplished. But simultaneously, he's pained that he's not able to take advantage of of the other treasure that's there, because time ran out. So the Vilna Gaon says, Torah is unlimited, it's infinite. Every moment of our life, we have to fully invest. But the more you understand what it is, you realize there's so much more. When Hashem says it's over, you're out. The buzzer rings. So David says, because I understand its value and I've accomplished so much, I'm pained that I can't continue doing it. Because when Hashem says it's over, it's over. So it's joy, but simultaneously you're pained that you're not able to continue partaking of that something which is so special. That's the Vilna Gaon. So I'm addressing what Mark says. If people don't understand the innate value of what it is, even not like David, anything. We wouldn't, our priorities would be priorities. We'd live our lives differently. But because, did you do tefillin this morning? I did tefillin, put on your talis, it's a multicolored talis. It's the closest things to David's, to Yosef's colored coat that his father bought him, Came back from Israel, he's showing the whole synagogue, what he paid. Hand broidered, and it's done by an artist, okay? In the Rova, this is exciting. That's what a talis is all about. The color and the Rova and all that, that's not what it's about. It's the mitzvah of tzitzis. And it's not a prayer shawl. It's a prayer shawl,